So let's just go ahead and configure the backup vault first. Now, if you remember when we were creating the backup vault, it said that, it said about the replication and stop delete. Let's talk about what those functionalities are. So we need to click on the overview blade. We need to click on properties. Now we need to do this setting to save cost as well. On the properties, you will see this option. So you will see the status of the backup vault is active, location is East US, this is the subscription ID, resource group, and then diagnostic setting, and then comes the backup. So under backup, it says backup configuration. You need to click on update. When you click on update, you will see two options, storage replication type. Backup vault is using a storage service in the backend, and the replication type is geo-redundant. Now, what this geo-redundant is, geo-redundant basically creates 6 copies of your backup. 3 copies in the same data center where the VM resides, and additional 3 copies in a different data center within the same region. So for example, if my VM resides in East US, and if my backup vault is configured with geo-redundant, I will have 6 copies of my backup. 3 copies will be kept in the same region, which will be synchronous replication. Additional 3 copies of my backup will be kept in a different data center within East US, within the same region. That's the benefit of geo-redundant. Then there is locally redundant. It means it will only create 3 copies and it will be kept in the same data center where the VM resides. So these are the 2 options for the backup. Now, if I go with geo-redundant, my cost will increase, but I will get one additional benefit. Since it is keeping 3 copies in a different data center, it also has one additional functionality which says cross-region restore. So this cross-region restore basically means if I enable this service, now you cannot revert it. So if I enable this service, then it will also copy. It will also send those 3 additional copies to a different region. If I'm in East US, then I can restore this VM in West US. This is again using the concept of regional pair, which means that if I enable cross-region restore, my virtual machines can also be restored across a different region. So I have my virtual machine in East US and I can enable this option, then I can restore them in West US. This is also similar to disaster recovery. I mean, it's not a full-fledged disaster recovery because the full-fledged disaster recovery has more things to it. This is based on the VM. So this is another feature which has been made available by Microsoft, but this feature is very costlier. That's the reason they say that cross-region restore is currently non-reversible storage property, non-reversible. Once you enable it, you cannot reverse it. You will need to delete this vault and recreate it and reconfigure the backup all over again. So I remember one of the customer when this feature was available, that customer was using only one backup vault to protect the to actually protect all the VMs or to back up all the VMs. And somebody by mistake enabled this and hit save. Next month, their storage bill was 4 times. That's the cost of this solution. So it's very costlier solution. If you already have a good disaster recovery strategy configured in your organization, I would suggest not to use this feature at all. And to optimize the cost of the solution, always use locally redundant. Because backup, the purpose of the backup is to restore the data, not restore the application. For application restoration, we are using disaster recovery. So what we will do, we will change the application type as locally redundant and save it. That's the first thing that we need to do. Why we are doing this now? Because we need to do these changes before we start to back up our virtual machines. If we have enabled backup for the first virtual machine, then we cannot change these settings. Microsoft doesn't allow. So we have clicked on save. Now it is locally redundant. We can click on update once again and see if it is LRS. No, it was not saved. Now I'm saving it. Okay, it is saved now. Now I'll go to the next option, which is security setting. The second option is encryption setting. This option basically talks about whether you want to use encryption using your own keys or Microsoft keys. So we have already seen this option a number of times. This is the main option that I want to talk about, which is security setting. Click on update, and in the security setting, you will see a service with the name soft delete. And by default, this soft delete functionality is disabled. Now, what this soft delete functionality is? So soft delete functionality says that, let's say if you accidentally delete the backup of your virtual machine accidentally, then Microsoft will still keep that backup for 14 days, 14 days, and you can restore it in those 14 days. That's the soft delete functionality. This is similar to recycle bin. You delete some data from your system, it goes into recycle bin, and then it stays there. You can put a policy on the recycle bin that any data which is kept in recycle bin for more than 14 days should be deleted. So this is similar setting. It really helps in case of an accidental deletion of data. And Microsoft does not charge any penny for this. They do not charge any money, any bill for that. So that's the reason by default it is enabled, but we are going to disable it. Why we are going to disable it? Because from the lab perspective, we will need to delete these VMs, recreate these VMs, and we don't want Microsoft to unnecessarily retain backup for these VMs. So we are disabling it, but in a production environment, you will always see this service enabled. And as I said, it is enabled for 14 days. So when the service is enabled, you can see it says backup data retained for 14 days after delete operation. So that's the benefit of this service. I'm disabling it for the time being for the purpose of this lab. So I'll also save this configuration. Okay. I have changed the backup replication as LRS, and I have changed the security setting for soft delete as disabled. These are the two things that I need to do. Any question on these two functionalities? All right, let's move on. So we are done with this. Now, the next option is to create a backup policy. So on the overview blade, under manage, you will see an option that says backup policy. So I'll click on backup policy. When you click on backup policy, you will see two default policies which are there. One policy is for Azure virtual machines. The other policy is for SQL Server. Microsoft has created two default policies. We will create our own policy so that you see all the configuration options which are there. So when you click on add, it asks you that for which service you want to create policy. Are you creating policy for Azure virtual machine, Azure file share, SQL Server, or SAP HANA? Microsoft Azure Backup Service or Recovery Services Vault supports backup for these services: virtual machines, file share, SQL servers, and SAP HANA. We'll select Azure virtual machines because that's what we have in our environment. Now, when we select Azure virtual machine, it says, all right, let's create the policy. Let's give the policy a name. So I can put VM, or I can put prod backup policy. So this is my prod backup policy or production backup policy. You already know that we will not have the same policy for prod and non-prod systems. For production systems, our policy will be a bit significant. For non-production systems, we can go with lower configuration. So I'm giving it a name. Then it says backup schedule. Now we need to give all the schedule. So the backup schedule, there are two options. You can take backup daily or weekly. So I'll select daily. Then it says at what time. Then I can select my time. Typically backup should trigger in off business hours. So if you believe that at 6 o'clock in the evening, all the people leaves for home, even if they are working from home, they stop working with the applications, then you can actually configure the backup at 8 o'clock or 7 o'clock. So I'll configure 8 o'clock. Then you need to select your time zone. I'll select my time zone, which is for India. Okay. So I'm saying that, okay, the backup should trigger every day at 8 o'clock in the evening according to India time. Then it says instant restore. Now, what is the time right now? It's 11 o'clock, 22 minutes past 11 in the morning here. If I configure this policy and if I add both the VMs into the backup, into this backup vault, when will my first backup will trigger? When will it trigger, guys?
Today at 8 p.m.
Today or within 24 hours.
Right. So today at 8 p.m. What if something goes wrong from this moment till 8 p.m.? What if at 2 o'clock in the afternoon today my virtual machine is deleted, or somebody by mistakes deletes some data? What will happen? Will I be able to restore?
No, I guess.
You cannot, right? That's the reason you have second option. So the second option says that since you're configuring the backup policy now, you will add virtual machines to this policy, and those virtual machines will be backed up as per the policy schedule. What if something happens in the interim? So what you should be doing, as soon as you enable backup of your virtual machines, you should take instant backup. You should trigger instant backup so that it creates at least one restore point. And then 8 o'clock in the evening today, when the scheduled backup happens, after that backup is completed, one restore point will be created. And you will have two restore point for today. And then from tomorrow onwards, it will be as per the schedule. So what it says that you take instant restore, instant backup of your virtual machine, and the restore point which will be created as by virtue of that instant backup, for how long you want to restore that, for how long you want to restore that restore point. That is 2 days, or 1 day you can keep it, whatever. So by default, it is 2 days, which means for next 2 days, I will have that instant restore point also available. So that's the reason this option is there. Then says retention range. Now, what should be the retention range? So now the production backup policy that I suggest to my customers who I help them, with consulting assignments, that's what I am actually, suggesting them to most of the customers is use the policy of 777. So what 777 says, it says backup, daily backup that you take, you should retain it for 7 days. Weekly backup, 7 weeks. Monthly backup, 7 months. Yearly backup, 7 years. That's the policy that I suggest. What is the benefit of this policy? At any point in time, let's say a month later, at any point in time, you will have last 7 days of data, backup data. You will have last 7 weeks of backup. You will have last 7 months of backup, and you will have last 7 years of backup. So you will have sufficient backup or restore points available to restore the data. That's the reason. And this also saves a lot of cost. How? Because if I go with Microsoft suggestion, Microsoft says that you retain your daily backup point for 180 days, which means 180 restore points for the last 6 months. Do you really think that I would need that much of restore point, that much of restore points? No. Even if I need to restore my VM or restore the data or some file and folder, most of the time it will be for the last 7 days, because that's where I would have some sort of data deletion, accidental data deletion or restore. Why would I restore my VM to a point, to a stage which it was at 3 months ago? What is the point of doing it? I will lose a lot of data, right? So that's the reason I go with this policy, that even because based on my observation or based on the industry observation, typically when you restore a virtual machine, you primarily restore it for the last day, last to last day, or 3 days prior, but you don't restore it 20 days prior. Even if you need to do that, you will have this weekly backup available. So even if you need to restore it 20 days prior, you can use one of the restore point, which is coming from this weekly backup. Because for every 7 days of backup, you will have one weekly backup also. If you need to restore your machine for the last 3 months, the stage where it was on last 3 months, you can use this monthly backup. At any point in time, you will have one monthly backup. For each month, there will be one backup. So that's the benefit. And 7 years, if you have some requirements with respect to retaining the backup for some audit and audit perspective. So that's what you can use. Is it making sense, this policy, guys?
Yes, Raghu. So Raghu, one question here is, likewise, we have seen the backup in the storage team. If let's say something goes down in prod, they go back and check for the previous weeks, or let's say the previous day's data, right? But as you suggested, okay, that we mostly go ahead and likewise we take couple of days back data or maybe a week's data.
Mm-hmm.
Is that kind of a, let's say, some rule that we have to kind of only backup for, or let's say utilize that backup for restoring the data for a couple of days, something of that sort? Because what we have seen is they actually do some analysis, and based on that they figure out which might be the best backup, and then they utilize it for kind of restoring.
Yep. So that's the same analysis that I shared with you. That based on the observation or industry research, it was identified that when you restore from backup, you typically restore for the last couple of days, or a specific restore point that you have created for a specific month or week. But you don't restore at random order. That's the reason this policy has come into existence. And by virtue of this policy, you are saving a lot of money, because Azure does not use incremental backup. Azure uses full backup. So every day it will take full backup of your virtual machine. Now, if your virtual machine has 2 terabyte of data, every day it is backing up 2 terabyte of data. Imagine if you have 180 restore points, 180 into 2, 360 terabyte of data for the last 6 months, which is, trust me, is useless. Because when you need to restore it, you will not restore it at any random day or any random number. There will be a strategy. Either you will restore it for the last 7 days, because that's where you have most recent information, or even if you need to restore it for the last weeks or months, you can use one of these backup, right? That's the reason.
Correct.
Okay, so let's configure this policy real quick. So it says that the backup that you take daily at 8 p.m., you want to restore it for how many days? I'll keep it like 7 days. Then if you wish, you can configure the weekly, monthly, and yearly as well. So let's just configure the weekly as well. So now the weekly backup, it says which weekly backup you need to consider. The one that happens on Sunday, Monday, when? So you can just decide. You can say, okay, the backup that happens on Sunday, because that will have the most recent information for the entire week. The backup that happens on Sunday at 8 p.m., the daily backup, I want to retain that backup for 7 weeks. So every Sunday, so you will always have last 7 days of data and last 7 weeks of data, last 7 Sundays of data, basically. Then the monthly backup, if you say, now the monthly backup that you want to restore, you can see, I want to restore the backup that happens on first day of the month, second day, third day, and then you can select the day here also. So you can select first Sunday, first Monday, whatever you want to select, and I want to restore it for 7 days. Similarly, yearly backup, I want to restore it. You need to select the one that happens in January, first day, and on 1st January, on first Sunday, I want to restore it for another 7 years. So that way you can create the policy. I'm saying these options, these additional retention options are optional. If you wish, you can select them, but this one is mandatory, wherein you need to at least select the retention for the daily backup. So that's how I'm configuring the policy. Then it says, then you need to click on create. That's it. So I've just configured the backup vault policy. Great. So this deployment is complete. Now I'm good. This is what I need to do. I need to create a backup vault and then I need to configure the backup policy. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to enable backup for my virtual machines. There are two options to do it. One, you can directly go to your virtual machine, any of the virtual machine, and on the virtual machine blade, under settings, you will find one option. I'm sorry, under operations, you will find an option that says backup. You can click on this option and here you can enable the backup. How? You will need to select, it says recovery services vault. You can create a new or select existing. So you can click on select existing. Then you need to select the vault. Right now, by default, your backup vault is appearing because when you enable backup for a virtual machine, Azure also knows that the backup vault has to be in the same region. And when it comes to East US, where the virtual machine is, you only have one backup vault. That's the reason by default it is coming. If you had multiple, then you would have selected it from the options which are there. So I'll select my backup vault. Then it says which backup policy you want to use. Now, if you remember, I've created this backup policy, prod backup policy, but I also have a default policy which Microsoft has. So if you select this, then it shows the policy details, that the details are backup will happen as per IST 8 o'clock in the evening. Instant restore will be kept for 2 days. The daily backup will be kept retained for 7 days, weekly backup for 7 weeks, monthly backup for 7 months, and yearly backup for 7 years. That's the policy. And if you see, it says full backup. So Microsoft does not use incremental backup, it uses full backup. Then if you go to default policy, the default policy says the backup frequency is some 3:30 in the afternoon UTC, and it will restore the instant recovery point for 2 days. And the daily backup that will happen at 3:30 will be restored for 30 days. That's the default policy. I'll select the one that I have created. So that way I can select these backup vault and the policy and enable backup. So that's the first option of doing it. However, if you do it from here, you will, and if there are 500 virtual machines, you will perform this operation 500 times because you need to go to each virtual machine and do it. So instead of doing it from here, I'll actually enable the backup from the vault itself. So let's go back to the vault. I'm not doing it from here. So I'll go back to the vault. I'll select my backup vault, and in my backup vault, I'll click on getting started. This getting started, here I have two options, backup or disaster recovery. Site recovery means disaster recovery. I'll select the option backup. So the vault is common for both backup and disaster recovery. When you are using this vault as backup vault, you will select the options related to backup. When you are using this vault for disaster recovery, you will select the options related to disaster recovery. So in the getting started, I'll select backup option. When I select backup option, now Azure Backup Service or this site recovery services vault, you can also configure it to back up your on-premises virtual machines as well. So it says, where is your workload running? See, these are the options. You can select on-premises as well, which means you can have a common backup tool, backup solution instead of using on-premises, instead of using a separate backup solution on-premises and separate backup solution in Azure. You can consolidate and use a centralized backup solution, which is Azure Backup Vault or Recovery Services Vault for your on-premises VMs as well. But here in this case, I'll select Azure. Then it says, what do you want to back up? Now, these are the options. I can back up a virtual machine. I can back up a file share. We'll talk about file share. I can back up a SQL Server, and I can also back up SAP HANA databases. These are the four options. So I'll select, I want to back up virtual machine. Then it says, all right, you've selected your settings, hit backup. When you hit backup, then the next option it says, please select the backup policy that you want to use. So I have two, I'll select the default, I'm saying the one that I have created, prod backup policy. Then it says virtual machines, which virtual machines you want to add. So you will need to click on add. When you click on add, to your right, it will open a pop-up, and here it will list down all the virtual machines that you have in East US region. It will list down all the virtual machines that you have in East US region. You can select the one that you want to back up. So right now, both the virtual machines are visible. I'll check both the virtual machines, select both the virtual machines. At the bottom, I'll click OK. It's validating. Validation means it basically validates if these virtual machines are up and running. In order to back up a virtual machine, it has to be up and running. If the virtual machine is in stop deallocated state, the backup will fail. Because what happens when you enable the backup, Microsoft is going to install a small utility on the virtual machine, push a small utility on the virtual machine, which will communicate with recovery services vault. So if the virtual machine is stopped, that utility will not be installed and you will get an error. So that's the reason it does the validation. So we have selected both the virtual machines. Now there is another option. This option was not available earlier. Your virtual machine may have multiple disks and you don't want to back up all of them because some disk contains non-critical data or log data or typical data that you don't need to back up because you delete that data that is not critical to you. So you can select this option that says if you want to back up the entire virtual machine, which includes OS disk as well as all the data disk, or you only want to back up the OS disk. So if you check this box, then for this virtual machine, it will only back up the OS disk. And if you don't check it, then it will back up all the disk of the virtual machine. So you don't have an option to actually pick and choose. If there are 5 data disks, I want to back up 2 of them and 3 I want to lose. That option is not available. Either you back up all the data disks or you back up none. So I'll not check this box and I'll click on enable backup. So this is how you enable backup for multiple virtual machines from the backup vault in one go, instead of going to each virtual machine blade and enabling the backup. Let me know if you have any questions so far.
So Raghu, let's say we actually don't want to provide the same policy, let's say the same backup for all the machines, right? Like you said, we have 1500, 500 machines, okay? So in that scenario, let's say if for first 200, I need some different sort of backup policy, and for the rest, how that can be done by selecting them.
Same process. You first of all, you need to create a backup policy, go to the vault, create the backup policy. Then
Okay.
you click on getting started, backup, select the VMs that you want to backup and select the policy.
Correct, sir. Okay.
You will have one backup vault backing up all the VMs, but those VMs can relate to different backup policies.
Sure.
Any other question, guys, on backup? All right, so the deployment is complete, which means that the backup has been added. Those VMs have been added to the vault. Now, if I go back to the VM once again, and if I click on the backup, I will see the change here. So if I click on backup once again, now I will not get an option to actually add this VM to a backup vault or to configure backup for it. Since it has already been configured, I'll get a different window. So this is the different window that I'm getting. Now, what Microsoft has most recently done, Microsoft has come up with another service with the name Backup Center. In Backup Center, it shows you backup and disaster recovery for all the services. That's the reason it says for backups, try our new Backup Center. It offers Azure Backup customers a unified way of recovery services vault used to backup in Azure. It also provides improved sorting and filtering of services. So you can click on it, it takes you to the Backup Center. This is your one-stop shop, which shows you everything. All the virtual machines which are getting backed up, all the virtual machines which are getting, for which the disaster recovery is configured, their current status and all of it. So you can go through this view. This is a new service. However, if we go back to the recovery services vault, and if you want to see how many virtual machines are added, how backup for how many virtual machines are added in this vault, you can also find it here. So now, earlier you clicked on getting started backup. Now, since this part is completed, if you need to add more virtual machines, you will always click on backup. If you want to find out how many virtual machines are getting backed up, you will always click on backup items under protected items. So now I'll click on backup items. and it will show me all the virtual machines which are getting backed up. Once again, Microsoft is trying to push the new service. So you also see the option, that message here, and it says Azure virtual machines, 2 virtual machines. SAP HANA 000 for rest of the environment. So I'll click on Azure virtual machines, and here I will see those 2 virtual machines and their current status as well. All right. So I see my both virtual machines here under backup items, resource group, backup recheck passed. They are good, but there is a warning. It says backup warning, initial backup pending. Exactly what I said, that right now it's, let's say 12 in the afternoon. My first backup will trigger at 8 o'clock in the evening. What if something goes wrong? So Azure is giving you this warning, and Azure is basically saying that why don't you take a quick backup for your virtual machine? So when you click on that warning, it will take you to this page, and here you can click on backup now. This backup now option, when you click on backup now, it will quickly trigger a backup operation for your virtual machine, and it will take a full backup of your virtual machine. And as once that full backup is completed, you will see a restore point here. Right now under restore point, it says 00. Then you will see one restore point. So let's quickly take instant backup. So I'll click on backup now. Then it says for how long you want to retain. As you've already seen, the option right now is, right now this is the option. You can also change it. So you can say that I want to retain it not for 13 days. Let's retain it for, today's Saturday, October 9th. So let's retain it for 11th of October, 2 days, and you can hit OK. And similarly for the other virtual machine, I'll go back to the other virtual machine and I'll take a quick backup now. So let's configure the instant backup for both the virtual machines. All right, we have configured the instant backup. Now let's see other options in Backup Vault. So this is my overview blade. Overview, this is what you see, right? Then it says activity log. You already know what is the purpose of activity log. This basically shows you activities that has been performed on this service as per the time frame that you select in the last 6 hours. So it will show me the activities against my name because I'm the one who is working on it, not exactly my name, the user using which I'm logged in. So that's the activity log, which is trying to bring. Text you already know, diagnose you already know, leave these options, properties I've talked about. Then comes logs. Logs I talked about already. Backup, you already know. Backup item, you already know. Then comes backup policy, so you already know. Backup infrastructure. Now in the backup infrastructure, it basically shows you if you're also backing up your on-premises VM, then you can come here and you can, you can just select that backup infrastructure. So since we are not backing up, we'll just go back. Then comes site recovery infrastructure. We will not talk about this. We will talk about this in our disaster recovery vault. Then comes backup reports. If you want to fetch reports for the backup, let's say your management says that, can you get me a report of last 6 months of backup? What was the status? Was there any error of that sort? You can get the report from here. Right now it is all blank because we just created this vault. Then comes alerts for the monitoring. We leave the monitoring part, but there is 2 things that you need to focus on here under monitoring. One is backup job. The other is backup alert. So if you click on backup jobs, When you go to a backup vault and click on backup jobs, it will show you all the jobs which are running in this at this moment, all the backup jobs. So if you see carefully, we have configured the backup for these two virtual machines. So those two jobs are completed. Then we have just triggered initial backup for both the virtual machines. That's the reason we have two jobs which are in progress. So that's the backup jobs. Uh, the backup administrators will always come to the screen to see the status of how backup is working. So that's backup jobs. If any of the job fails, then you will find that information here, backup alerts. So let's say you have a production environment which comprises of 1,000 VMs. You've configured the policy. As per the policy, the backup got triggered. However, for one of the virtual machine, it went down or there was an outage and the backup failed. So anything related to that notification will come under backup alerts. So you'll come to backup alerts, and if you will see an alert will either be warning or critical. Warning means it will tell you something. Critical means that the backup failed or backup could not be triggered. Now, for backup to happen, the virtual machine should be in running state. So if the virtual machine is stopped deallocated, let's say backup is scheduled to happen at 8 o'clock, but at 7 o'clock in the evening, you shut down the virtual machine. So the backup for that virtual machine will not happen. The backup service will connect to that virtual machine. It will not get a response from the virtual machine. It will just exclude that virtual machine from the backup, and you will get the alert in this window. Now, if you see, there is only one alert which says soft delete disabled. So Microsoft is telling you, you know what, you've disabled soft delete. You can go back and enable it. So that's the alert you are getting. However, now that we have enabled two virtual machines in this backup vault, if I go to the properties once again, and if I click on backup configuration update, you will see that they have now removed that option. You do not have an option to change the application. The portal is working a bit slower. It happens sometimes. So let's just wait, guys. All right. So if you look carefully, I do not have an option to switch these settings now. This option is now disabled, and that's the reason we actually reviewed this option and modified it before we protected our first VM. So this option is not available. Now, we have also disabled this option, soft delete, and it basically remains enabled in a production environment. So let's say you're working as an Azure administrator and you receive a request from a user, or you receive a service request or a ticket from the user, and user says, I've got 5 virtual machines which belongs to this application. We have decided not to use this application anymore because we have switched to a different SaaS-based application. Can you just go ahead and remove all the VMs and its underlying infrastructure, right? So what you will do, you will quickly go ahead, you will identify a resource group where all those virtual machines for that application are hosted, and you will delete the resource group, or you will one by one identify all the resources and delete them, which also includes deletion of the backup. So you will come to the virtual machine and you will stop backup and delete all the restore points. But since soft delete functionality is enabled, those restore points will continue to remain in your storage for another 14 days. How do you get rid of it? What you should do so that you don't unnecessarily retain those points for next 14 days? What you should do in that case? This scenario comes pretty often in production environment. Did you understand my question?
Can you repeat, Raghu?
So my question is, I have an application.
Mhm.
I say you are the Azure administrator. You receive a request you receive a service request, and the request says, please delete this application and its underlying infrastructure. The infrastructure comprises of 5 virtual machines. You need to delete those virtual machines. So the first question, along with those virtual machines, will you be also deleting the backup and disaster recovery configuration for those virtual machines if it exists?
I will probably keep it for 14 days or maybe 1 month.
Okay, but why? The customer has said that please delete, we don't need it. Why would you keep it? Just in case they realize their mistake and they come back to you stating that
Yes.
it back. Okay, all right, great. That's acceptable point and it happens. But let's say customer will not need it. They are 200% sure they will not need it. Now, will you not delete the backup and disaster recovery configuration for those virtual machines as well? Yes, no?
I guess so.
Yeah, okay. So when you delete the backup and disaster recovery configuration, let's focus on backup because we have not studied disaster recovery so far. So when you delete the backup, when you remove that virtual machine from the backup vault, this is how we do it. I'll just duplicate the tab so that I continue to have this tab, and I'll open another tab. I'll show you how to remove it. So for example, this is the virtual machine. I will just go to its backup. And here is an option that says stop backup. I'll just click on stop backup. Then I will have 2 options. I can retain backup data, which means I can retain the restore points, or I can delete backup data. So I'll select the option delete backup data. Then I'll type the name of the backup item. And then name of the backup item means name of the virtual machine. Why Microsoft is making you do this? So that you're 100% sure that you are not doing it by mistake. So you type the name of the virtual machine, then you select the region, any region that you want to select, and then you hit stop backup. What it will do, it will stop backup of this virtual machine, remove the virtual machine from this backup vault, and it will also delete all the backup data. This is what you're doing. So let's say you have just clicked on stop backup. I'm not doing that. The virtual machine will be removed from the backup vault. All the restore points will be deleted. But because of this functionality, because the soft delete was enabled, it will still be retained for next 14 days. So what we do typically when we are 100% sure we don't need the virtual machines back, before you delete the virtual machines or before you remove them from the backup, you will come to the security settings and you will disable it. You will disable it, save it, then go back to the virtual machine and stop backup and delete the restore files so that they are deleted straight. They are deleted straight away. They do not get retained for next 14 days. Once that part is done, then you will come back to the setting and enable the setting once again. So that's what we typically do. Is it making sense now?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So we are good with backup. That's all I wanted to cover in the backup part.